Hey everyone, I think everybody's now joined us. Just a reminder, your rules of the meeting, please keep your mics and your video off, but please engage with us by chatting in the chat box. Our presenter today is Suzanne Hattingh and her strategy-focused skills audit. Suzanne, are you ready to go ahead and share your screen?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about strategy-focused skills audit. And the reason why I call it strategy-focused skills audit is because we use the 2024 strategy of a specific business as the context for questions on skills gaps and skills needs. So the whole skills gap and skills audit was focused on the strategy. The benefit of this is that we gained management buy-in for the audit and for staff development, because the important thing that managers are always asking is, what is in it for my department? Why should I be involved in this process? And we enable them to see the benefits for achieving their performance targets. The focus was on the business expansion over 3-year strategy, because they all felt that 1 year was too short for real change. They actually had a criticism of the CETA process of saying 1 year, you cannot actually do proper skills planning in a 1-year cycle. So, but then also they said 5 years is too long in this fast changing world. So what we did is we drew down from the strategic goals to the key result areas, to the competencies required for the KIRs, then to the individual staff, and then to the skills gap. So all the time it was building down from the strategic goals. It was not a compliance-driven skills audit. Yes?
Just a question from my side.
Yes.
I mean, you said that your 3-year time horizon was about the fast-changing work context. In your experience, is that true? Do you think 3 years is right for most businesses, or was it just because of this particular work environment?
I think for this work environment, 3 years is probably too long, because they are really a fast-changing organization. So I think it does change. I think in some organizations, maybe 6 months, and some organizations, maybe, I can't say that 5 years, any organization should be doing strategic planning over 5 years. It's just simply too long at this stage. So I would say that it does depend on the specific industry. I was going to say agriculture can be slower, but it's not true, because you've got so much technology even entering the agricultural world. So I think the time frame depends on the specific industry where they are and how rapid the changes are in the area.
Cool, thanks.
So the point is that this was not a CETA process. It was not focused on the WSP or any kind of CETA compliance or BEE. It was focused absolutely on the organization trying to achieve its strategic goals. As I've already mentioned, we did this. This is actually built on a case study of a specific business, medium-sized electronics engineering company, 12 departments. The largest is innovation and design, which already tells you that they are in the fast-changing environment. Offices in Midrand, Durban, Nigeria, East Africa, and they are planning global expansion strategy to the UK and further. So you can see they've got a broad global vision. Staff, relatively small, 250 staff, 30% engineers, again, very technical, highly expert. Ages, you can see the age range, quite a lot of people under 30 years old, also 30% 50 years and older. And the experience, at least 50%, have 10 to 15 years in the company. One of the key issues to consider when you're doing the skills audit is also the staff profile, because as we went along, we realized that the staff profile impacted very strongly on the strategy, bringing new people in, finding a way of either changing the mindsets of older people or redeploying them or finding another way of using the older people. Just to give you an overview of what we did, the executive identified the need, which is also interesting. It wasn't the SDF who identified the need. The executive identified the need. We did the planning with the human capital executive and the team, briefed the executive with the CEO and all the business leaders, explained the process, and again confirmed the buy-in. The first round was questionnaires completed by the business leaders. So thereafter, we did individual interviews with the business leaders. who had completed the questionnaires, maximum of 15 members per manager. So the manager really understood their staff. And the human capital business partners were part of the process all the time and with the interviews. Then we did the consolidated report per department on the specific areas that we identified as priorities. The next round was actually to look at 35 critical posts. And I think this was very interesting that in any organization, there are the critical posts. So when you do a skills audit, you don't have to do a skills audit of all the staff, but you might need to identify these critical posts that were identified by the organization. They completed questionnaires. There were follow-up interviews with them on areas that we weren't certain, and then a consolidated report. And now the consolidated report that we're busy with at the moment will now go to the CEO and the human capital executive on both the department and the critical posts. So the questions in the questionnaires were around the key result areas. And so this is where the managers completed this for the individual staff members. The first thing was to look at the KRAs. Are they still relevant? To what extent are they still relevant? And then for individual staff members to say, how competent are they in terms of the KRAs? So really try to focus the questionnaires very specifically on the KRAs, and the KRAs are linked to the business strategy. So for each member of staff, they then indicated whether the KRAs are still relevant and the competence level. These were completed on an Excel spreadsheet. The essential starting point was clearly formulated KRAs that must be known and used within the organization. You cannot actually do a proper skills audit if you don't have this kind of basis to work from. The next section of the questionnaire was then to look at the type of intervention. So if you think the earlier one, we started with the KRAs, how relevant are they, how competent are people, and the next question was then, what is the type of intervention? So they had to identify the type of intervention, and they also, with the management, we decided on these interventions. Is it going to be built internally, externally, in other words, recruit people, reassign the people in the organization, redeploy them, or retrench them? What was interesting here is that the build externally in terms of formal training or even informal training was the lowest need in the organization. Most of the skills needs that were identified could be addressed through building internally. So very, very strong in terms of mentoring, coaching, on-the-job training, things that could happen in the organization, which was very interesting coming out for the managers. Then they had to explain the nature
Suzanne,
of the intervention. Yes.
Sorry, just a question. So in your experience that build internally, build externally, kind of the relative importance in this organization, do you think that's typical across many organizations?
It might not be typical, but I think it's something that we need to think of. And I think especially as human capital practitioners, we always complain that managers always want to send people on training. And the training is not always the solution. I mean, we know that very clearly. I think what helped here is the fact that you took the manager from the KRAs and there was that intensive questionnaire that they completed, and then the interviews that actually led them to the point where if you really engaged with them and say, okay, now this person has this problem, how are we going to address this problem? That they logically said, well, actually they could be partnered with that guy, because we're talking about people. They say, they could partner Miriam with Vusi, because Vusi is an expert and he works next to her. Okay, let's do it that way, because so they do a lot of external training. They're not against external training. A lot of their staff are on degree programs, but I think they realized the value of building internally and even externally. There was a lot of attending conferences, participating in webinars, looking at kind of informal training rather than formal training. The formal accredited training was the lowest in all of the departments. So that was very, very interesting that you actually got managers to think more creatively about how are we going to address this specific need in the organization.
Just a question from Melanie Ritchie's. Suzanne, would you be able to share the Excel spreadsheet with us as an example?
Yes, I could do that. I'll
Okay.
clean it out and I will be able to share it with you.
Thanks.
It's actually a quite simple one. Okay, and then how urgently the intervention was needed, which was also very useful. And then the key points is that the skills audit report is not the training and development report. And I think this is important for HR and human capital and skills development practitioners to realize that because we tend to see the skills audit as a result of the skills audit as like the workplace skills plan or whatever you call it these days. The SDF needs to take the information from this audit and then extract the relevant information for external reporting. So the primary client for the skills audit report is not the CETA. It is the executive, the CEO of the company, and the executive members of each of the departments. Then we asked very specific questions on the strategy. All the managers are very familiar with the strategic goals, and then we need to say what significant changes will your department need to undergo to achieve those strategic goals, so that you can again focus them. What are the changes? And then from the changes, then lead to which of your staff have what it takes. This was quite interesting. They were very clear about the staff that they believe have what it takes for the 2024 strategy. And then we asked them that question to say, okay, if Miriam and Joe Mavuse, if they have the staff, what are the key skills and personal attributes, characteristics, competencies of these people? And what we're doing in the final report is to say, in the whole organization, from all the managers, these are the 20 key skills, personal attributes, etc., that you identified as critical for the 2024 strategy. And then, of course, a logical question is which of the staff do not have what is required? And I think the big challenge for all organizations is, what are you going to do about these people? Because now you've identified, you've got your strategy, you've gone through the skills audit, and you've identified these are the people that are simply not going to make it. They don't have it within them, because there were quite a few people where the manager said, you know, we've sent them on training repeatedly, but they are simply not improving their workplace competence. So that's a very important question. And this is where the reassign, realign, retrench comes in. It was actually interesting that in the company of 250, there were less people targeted for retrenchment than one would have thought, because of all these internal development activities, and also reassigning people, for example, to more technical positions or to more administrative positions where they could be more effectively used for achieving the department. So the next issue was looking at the critical staff that I've already mentioned, and a similar questionnaire that we used for them, again, to get each of them to say, you know, your KRAs, are they still relevant? What changes need to be made in the KRAs because you're working in this job? And then how competent are you? And people were actually very honest about where they were competent. And then also to identify what new KRAs should be added, and therefore what are the new skills that you might need. Because of this fast-changing world, a question asked to both the managers and the individual staff members was, how important are these skills? Again, the same question, how important are these skills for your department? How relevant are they? And to what extent are your staff ready for these skills? Now, these are, I mean, there are many lists, but I've reduced the list to these. We know some of them we understand quite well: adaptability, flexibility, innovation, collaboration, that's important, systems thinking, a lot of these things make sense to us, design thinking, that's very important. And then we've got things like transdisciplinarity, that really is about the ability to work across disciplines rather than the way that even universities and of course the OFO is training people at the moment for very specific disciplines and very specific occupations. And people who may know me better know that I have a serious problem with that, and I've written a lot about that, and I've always been raving about the problems of the OFO, specifically because it forces us into this kind of a silo thinking, whereas transdisciplinarity becomes very important. Computational thinking, the ability to deal with all of this information that we need. And I've included for you a whole description of all of these skills. And so this was important also for the managers to then say, what do our staff look like in terms of these skills, if these are the skills that we need for our, and the same for 2024. And then the key question for us as human resource practitioners is, how do you teach these skills? I don't have the answer, but what I do know is that you don't teach these skills by sending people on CETA accredited training, because you're never going to have unit standards or qualifications in transdisciplinarity or new media literacy. And this is why I think, coming back to the company and the strategy, a lot of the interventions were informal, webinars, going to look at other companies, finding other companies that they are engaging with, getting the staff to work in those environments so that they can learn these kinds of new skills. So these were the questions. How important are they? How do you rate your current competence, and how do you develop those skills? And here is the whole list of descriptions for you.
Sorry,
not
before
perfect,
you,
but a list for them. Yes.
Before you go on, just to go back to that slide. So the link between the KRAs and the 4IR skills. Talk a little bit about how you established that link. I mean, and is it particularly relevant for this type of business, which works with systems and such like, or do you see them as important across all sectors? Talk a bit about that link, if you would.
I think the link came in strongly because the questions that we asked them, can I just clarify, in addition to the Excel spreadsheet, we had separate questions that we did as a follow-up to the spreadsheet. And so the one question was specifically about 2024 strategy. What are the skills? How relevant is the strategy for your business, the specific strategy, because some of the strategy points are more important for some business units than others. So that was the first question. How important is the strategy? What are the skills that are needed in your department to achieve this strategy? And when they were talking about 2024, the next question was looking at these skills and then mapping these skills to the skills they need for the 2024 strategy. And there was a very obvious link. Because these people, for example, there are a lot of engineers and they're working in a very competitive environment, these concepts were not foreign to them. There was some like transdisciplinarity, although they already realized as part of their interventions. For example, they said that their sales and marketing staff need to work far more with the engineering team, because you can't sell the product if you don't understand the technology, because the people that you're selling the technology to are going to ask you very specific questions. So even there, they are already bringing transdisciplinarity in. So yes, so I think it also differed, because in the innovation and design department, these were very important, the 4IR skills. But for example, in the warehousing department, they were not that important, whereas issues like digital literacy became very important, because they realized that they increasingly have to change their system to be more digital. But I must say there wasn't, there were some things like, for example, cognitive load management, where the warehouse department said, that's not such an important issue for them. But what was nice, because we also gave them the descriptions of each of these terms. So we actually engaged with them on what do we mean by digital literacy. That a lot of them said, initially I didn't think this was important, but now that I think about it, actually, all of these things are important. So in general, in this company, most were important, but I could see that there are some companies in which some would be less important than others. I mean, this company that's now going global, collaboration in virtual cross-cultural teams is very important. The one issue that came up with them very strongly is, how do you manage people that you never see? And that's an important issue for us in this environment, because increasingly we are going to be asked to manage and train and develop people that we have never seen. If they've got offices in Oman, they've never been there, they've never seen the staff. How do you manage people that you never see? And I think this is when you really think through these 4IR skills in terms of the implications for the kind of work that we're involved in skills development, it actually it's very, very challenging. And they also realize that a lot of their staff, their recruitment processes, for example, have to change, because as part of your recruitment process, you sit around the table and you sit and interview the person. And so obviously that, you can't do that anymore. And what they were saying is that even if you are, it's not just the fact that you can see a person on the screen, this cross-cultural issues are very important. They said, that they often have a problem reading people if you just see the face on the screen, rather than sitting in an interview and having the body language of the person. So in terms of this government, to answer your question again, although there were varied departments, of 15 varied departments, none of them said this stuff is nonsense. It doesn't make sense for us. We are all either starting with this, or we are going to have to make a big change in this, in order to make the organization more effective. And I think an important thing for organizations that keep talking about global expansion, now that the world is open, you can globally expand, there's a lot of factors that you need to take into consideration in managing people in this global environment.
Suzanne, so you've got 3 minutes left. A comment from John Arneson. This is such a significant conversation. I hope every SDF is having the same conversation with their clients and employers. And he also asked the question, am I the only person that cannot see the bottom on Suzanne's slide? You're on, John. It's cognitive load management. Suzanne, won't you just talk a little bit about that? It's a new one to me.
Cognitive load management is there's so much information available. So there's so much information in your brain that you cannot handle it. So it's about managing the amount of information and input that goes into your brain and trying to process all of that at the same time.
Cool. That's a great category. It's a great skill.
And I mean that is for everybody, because I mean there's just so much information. It's finding out what is the information that I need that is relevant. So even the selection to start off with, so that you can throw away all the fluff and take the essence of the things that you really need to know, and then how do you deal with that? And also because a lot of that stuff is completely new. It's not stuff that you've been dealing with in the last 3 or 6 months. So in most cases now, most of us are finding ourselves in a situation where we just have to muddle through from day to day and find new ways of coping with new ways of working, because the old ways are simply not working anymore.
Suzanne, we've basically got 30 seconds left. Just a comment from Melanie Ritchie's. Working from home has us all on cognitive load management.
Yes, absolutely.
I think we echo that. Suzanne, I think we're done here. I think the time is up. Thank you so much. It's been very stimulating for everyone. Angelique, will you post the link for CPD points, please? Suzanne, any final comments while we do that?
No, that's fine. Go ahead and change, and get your organizations to change, and get the CETAs to change, and the QCTO to change. But I do hear they're starting to be more open to informal credentialing. Because I mean, our final point that I always say is that the unit standards and the qualifications registered on the on the OFO ain't going to take us into the fourth industrial revolution. I'm sorry, but that is the reality. Because it was built for an old system, and it's not ready for 4 IR. So we have to find new ways of empowering staff to do what they need to do.
Yeah. John Arneson again, agree the OFO is last century. So then I think we are done. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.